until the invention of air conditioning, common use of air conditioning. The city of Charleston died for the summer. I mean, things were still, businesses were still open. There was no very few official functions, no social functions. People either went to the beach or to the mountains, and
churches throttled down to like one service instead of two. No,
there's still a little, but not what it was. So, yeah, but not having any court from May 31 to September 1 would be really, that's, or administrative hearings or anything else would be really nice.
no construction. That. Catch up. No, you just forget about what happened. Sometimes that's more important.
They would shut down in winter. There's no building in winter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The opposite.
Yeah, if you're not out of the ground by Thanksgiving, you're not doing anything.
First to get.
All we have is hurricane season.
I'm very fascinated.
So
we can proceed without.
I can bring my ordinance.
interesting. We don't have to.
Yes.
We're not obligated to live stream this.
You are live on YouTube.
We're live.
It'll be you.
I didn't know that. One question. I was thinking about this stuff.
Are you trying to open it?
See you at
It's messed up. It wants. It's got.
If you want to open it to something else.
The one on the fire truck. That's not the actual document. Unless that's the old copy.
Right.
No, that's the old one. Okay, it was the right document.
I just never.
That's the, so you right click it open.
I'll start. All right. I want to thank everyone for their patience. This is the April 27, 2022 meeting of the City of Charleston's BAR Large. We were working through some minor technical issues that allow the public to continue to view the live stream as well as have these meetings recorded on YouTube. So thank you for that. That's a way that we make sure that the public feels included and in these meetings, and we are being as accessible as possible in this age. I'm going to read through the BARL's protocol for those who are not familiar with it. First, let me start with my chairman's notes. This is both an in-person meeting at the public meeting room at number 2 George Street, as well as a meeting that is recorded on Zoom, available via YouTube and live stream. My name is John Robinson. I'm chairman of the BARL.
The other board members present this evening are Jay White, who will recuse on agenda item number 5.
Stucco, who will recuse on agenda item number 5. James Metters and Eddie Fava joining us as an alternate this evening. Eddie, thank you for volunteering your time to be with us. City staff present this evening are Tori Parrish and Lawrence Courtney. The general order of the meeting will be as follows. There will be an introduction and overview of the project by city staff to the board and for the benefit of the public. This will be followed by an application presentation, which ordinarily has a 10-minute time limit unless extended by the chair, and any questions of the applicant by the board and staff. Any and all presenters, regardless of what their affiliation with the project is, should clearly state their name for the record. Persons affiliated with the project, be they owners, developers, designers, consultants, or others, should speak during this portion of the meeting rather than later portions. This is followed by the written public comment period. Written comments are due at noon on the business day before the meeting and transmitted to the board members as soon as possible thereafter. We have put those both in the record and considered them as part of our deliberations this evening. Unless determined by the chair to the contrary, written comments will not be read into the record out loud at the meeting. This period is followed by live public comment for anyone who is here with us this evening. Those speakers have a 2-minute time limit per person or as determined by the chair. The applicant does not respond to individual comments made during public comment or at the end of that public comment period. Again, any member of the public desiring to speak should state their name and address for the record. This public comment period is followed by city staff comments and recommendations. There's then an applicant response or clarification period to any of the foregoing material, be it the public comment or the city staff comments and recommendations. There's a 5-minute cap on this presentation. The applicant will then take a seat and speak only if called upon by the board or staff to clarify or answer questions. This is then followed by a board discussion and vote. The applicant presentation and the public comment period has been closed. The applicant may clarify inaccurate information when recognized by the chair by raising their hand and waiting to be called upon, but otherwise may only speak if asked a question by board member or staff. Note as a preliminary matter that no agenda items have been deferred this evening. This is a reminder to our visitors tonight to please turn off all cell phones and other potentially disruptive devices. This is a further protocol note that regardless of who you are, applicant or member of the public, as well as members of the board, our comments are limited to architecture only. Comments related to zoning or derivative items such as parking, traffic, lot coverage, and livability concerns are not the purview of this board and therefore cannot be voiced here. Additional protocol. Yes.
I need to recuse.
Number 3 as well. Thank you. Additional protocol. The applicants and all team members have been required to register and submit any and all documents in advance of the meeting. Staff control the slide presentation, and that includes everything submitted by the applicant by the deadline in accordance with submittal requirements. Applicants simply need to ask the staff to advance to the next slide or the slide they want to go to during the presentation. Applicants, staff, and board members are required to give their name whenever speaking. In the public comment period, all applications heard today are part of the public meeting format. Written public comment received by the deadline the day before provided, we covered a little bit of this, but just as a summary, those comments received by the appropriate deadlines have been considered and summarized. We won't read them into the record unless we need to. Members of the public need to identify their name and address for the record. During the period where board members deliberate and vote, board members will be polled by the chairperson for comments and for their vote on the motion. Each member when voting should respond yea in favor or nay not in favor. If I have not, I will reread your motion verbatim. If I have not reread it verbatim or misinterpreted it, but you should please correct me. Results for tonight's agenda items will be posted on the city website at charleston-sc.gov/BAR. Agenda item number 1 is approval of our minutes from the Marathon March 23rd, 22 meeting. I take it that my fellow board members have reviewed those minutes. Could I entertain a motion to approve it?
So
There's a motion from Mr. White to approve. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Metters. Being a motion and a second. Mr. Fava, how do you vote on this motion?
I in favor.
Mr. Metters. Ms. Sobchak. Mr. White.
Yeah, in favor.
And myself in favor. Passes unanimously. Agenda item number 2, Ms. Parrish.
2 is 8 Charlotte Street, requesting final approval.
Demolition of an existing one-story building, drive-through and site elements, which include brick and iron fencing, wood fencing, and hardscape. This building was constructed in 1993, and it's in the Old and Historic District. So for this one, we'll have Mr. Subject or Mr. Halford present. Okay, thank you. You may come on up, and while we are looking at some context slides, we've got an aerial for you showing the location of the building. Charlotte, looking at the site, the actual building itself is sort of behind those trees and wall. Slides that I forgot. So we're looking east at the building, the wall, the wooden fence, all the hardscaping and site elements. All right, thank you.
My name's Hank Hoffer, Winter Hope Construction Company. I'm working with Green Room Partners, John Laurie and Rob Tulloch. They've recently acquired the land adjoining this property, and we received permission to demolish the old Stucco warehouse. Been able to work out a deal with the Voloff to relocate his storage yard to his site, so that'll clean up the whole area. We've now been able to slide down, so we're now adjoining this property. These properties are under contract on the corner of Washington and Charlotte, and East Bay and Charlotte. I think Corey just mentioned that there's an old bank drive-through building there that was built in 1993. Don't think it's been used for a long time. It's just a vacant parking lot basically there now, so we'd like permission to tear that down. We did go through a rezoning of the property, I think it was last week, with the Planning Commission, received unanimous approval for residential rezoning, and we'd like to be able to tear this building down and proceed forward with our plans. So if you have any questions, if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffer. If we have questions, we'll get back to you in just a minute on those. Thank you. Any public comment?
Don't have any written public comment, but
Any member of the public hearing to speak on agenda item number 2? Hearing none. City staff comments and recommendations.
so a couple of staff comments. Reviewing considerations for demolition review found in section 54-240, article B. Staff finds nothing that would elevate the structure and site elements on the property to be important enough to be saved from demolition or saved for the future project. The date of construction for the building and site elements and the auto-oriented function do not contribute to historic, cultural, or architectural importance. Applicant might consider retaining the wood fence due to its good condition if useful, and we're recommending final approval for demolition.
Thank you. And just as a matter of protocol and good order, I would note that on one of the slides, there's a typo that says that the structure was circa 1933. And I know they got revised. But I'm just, to anyone who's, cares about 20th century architecture and our height sensitivity to it, this is a 1993 structure, not a 1933 structure, as Mr. Hofford said in his remarks. Just making sure we're all on the same page on that. We don't want any confusion. No, just making sure that we didn't want it to be in the paper. That concludes the city staff comments and recommendations. Mr. Hofford, if you want to rebut or have anything to add, you may. The subject.
Yeah, very quickly, that wooden fence is on the way of any construction and it's uncontrolled, so I just want to make sure that.
No, and we don't mean that as a directive.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing further. That's it, Mr. Hofford. Okay, very good. We will now move to board discussion and potential vote on this agenda item. Is there any board discussion on this?
I've prepared a lengthy statement that I can summarize by a motion for final approval.
There's a motion for final approval for demolition from Mr. White on agenda item number 2. There's a second from Mr. Metters. I'll proceed to call the roll. Mr. Favor, how do you vote on this agenda item? Mr. Metters. Mr. White.
Yeah.
Myself, yea, in favor, passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you all very much. Look forward to seeing you again with a new design.
Agenda item number 3.
547 Main Street, requesting final approval of the mock-up panels. This one is new construction, obviously, in the Height District 5 and in the Historic Corridor District. So for this one, Ms. Kira Brower and Mr. Richard Gallup present.
Very good. The applicant has the.
And before I get started, it was requested at the site meeting for some.
If you want to, sure, you can distribute it.
My name is Kira Brower, and I am an architect representing the design team at LSUP. And I'm here today on behalf of the Montford Group. Start by thanking the board for coming to meet us on site yesterday. I'm going to focus the presentation on the details and concerns that were discussed during that meeting. You can go ahead and see the photographs. The first item to note is the off on the metal panel project. We acknowledge that it is over the top and overdone, and the intent is expressed in the details where most of the joints will be shadow and recessed joints. So the caulk will be 1/2 inch to 1 inch for the panel. You can also see in that last page and for the flashing at the head of the windows. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. The second item to note is comparison of the 2 cornice materials. The photograph on the left-hand side is showing an FRP material, and on the right-hand side is a GFRC. This is something that was requested after our final review so that we could determine if FRP was the appropriate decision for this project. As Charleston architects, we understand the need to have high-quality materials and the contribution that it has to our city's fabric. And for the FRP on this project, we believe that it is the correct choice. These profiles are going to be 60 feet in the air or higher. It's a lighter weight material, so it's more appropriate for this application. It's also a non-porous material, so when you're comparing it to the GFRC, it's not going to have as much discoloration and seepage of water. And it can also be installed in longer sections, which is more in line with our design intent. We are also confident in the lifespan of the material, as well as the color control that we have in it and kind of the crisp, clean look that it gives. And you can go to the next slide, see the details that compare between the 2 materials, as well as take a closer look at the joints in the metal panel. It should also be noted that the condition where the metal panel meets the FRP cornice on the top corner does not exist in the building. It's just how the mock-up panel is constructed. And I think those were the main concerns. I hope I've addressed them. I look forward to working with the board as this project moves forward, and I appreciate all of your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Public comments on either category on this agenda item? None?
None written.
Thank you. City staff comments and recommendations?
Sure. Ceiling around dark windows that white painted brick should be white. Applicant discussed this prior to the meeting and agrees. 2, additionally, sealant and metalwork at the metal portion of the mock-up will need to be cleaned and tightened. It is believed that this has been discussed by the applicant prior to the meeting as well, and they agree. 3, the applicant requested the additional placement of GFRP on the mock-up as an alternative to the GFRC band at the second floor. While having some advantages in terms of handling, forming, and placement, staff still prefers the GFRC for its perceived increased durability. 4, it was discussed whether to paint the cast stone windowsill to match the brick. There are various ways to think about this, and staff would like the board's direction on this. And 5, modifications and corrections of the above items to the mock-up should take place and be approved prior to the start of exterior work. We're recommending approval with board and staff comments with applicant to make conditional approval corrections required on the mock-up prior to the exterior work on the building.
Very good. Ms. Brower or anyone from the applicant care to respond to staff?
Yeah. The main comment about the FRP being at the second floor was a misunderstanding when we were on site. The second floor band is actually a cast stone cap that will be running around, and the 5th floor, which is 60 feet up in the air, will be where the FRP is located. And I'm in agreement with your earlier comments about that.
Thank you. Board discussion and a vote on this mock-up agenda.
Well, I will say that the FRP is something that we've struggled with as a board before, mostly over concerns over longevity. I know what a 40-year-old boat hull looks like, and I know what a piece of cast stone or thereabouts looks like after 40 years, and I'm just not really comfortable with it, even though it is so high up in the air, because at that elevation, it will receive no maintenance. And so I think that the GFRC is probably a better fit for the project, and it also is a lightweight material. In regards to other staff comments, whether the cast stone windowsill should be painted and match the brick, I probably would lean against that, just because of the maintenance that will introduce to the project. And then the sealants were well identified on the job site. I think the sealant joints themselves are far too wide. They should be much narrower. All the metalwork can be wrought a lot tighter to not have inch to inch and a quarter sealant joints, especially with multiple colors overlaid.
Further board comments, sure.
I agree with they said, so I'm not gonna. I believe that we should move and have those corrections made, because it is community is the owners are architect's opportunity. Everybody acknowledged the condition of the mock-up, the mortar, the ground, the caulk, the metal tightening, exposures, that just wasn't there, and the attention to detail. And I know that CBI can deliver. Should.
Any further comment?
I have a question about FRP. When we were on site, somebody had mentioned that there was a building or two that already had it in place.
Been in place for a while, do you know?
And the Jasper has it installed as a more. The portico and balustrades, the porches, as well as the penthouse level.
Further board comment? I'll just add on to what Mr. Metter said as a procedural matter that confronts the BAR. which is the mock-up effectively becomes our only guarantor of what the finished product is going to look like in terms of fit and finish, and it becomes critical. I'll defer to my other board members, particularly those actively involved in architecture and construction, as to the superiority of some of these materials. But in terms of fit and finish of the mock-up is our best estimation, guarantor to the public of what the finished product is actually going to be in terms of quality. And so I would join Mr. Metters in his concerns in that regard. I would also state that I'm tremendously sympathetic to the builders, developers, applicants, architects, because of the very unique constraints we have right now, both because of supply chain, sunk cost that's involved in the mock-up, the quality of staff that can be on hand to build out the mock-up. We understand all of those issues, but again, understand that even under the best of circumstances, it's hard to get it perfect. Again, as a public body, that's our best estimation, our best check off of what the building is going to finally and completely look like without substantial revisions or concerns about the quality of the finish. Further board comments?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, and related to that and staff comment number 5, would that order materials and things like that, let them proceed with certain things, but that would be the only question.
It would, and the staff's recommendation technically has many conditional approvals as to the specific issues raised, be that the ones that staff has brought up or the ones that we incorporated into a motion tonight. That is one way to fix it. The issue is, once it leaves this table, we're relying on staff and the applicant to get it done at each stage after that, which presents you substitute one set of challenges for another. Sure. Further staff comment, board comment or questions?
Well, typically when we have issues of this sort with a mock-up, we usually will defer it for corrections rather than release it. And I know the board generally in the past couple of years have been really reluctant to partial approvals of mock-ups because it sets puts us in a defensive position. So I'm going to introduce a motion for deferral with board and staff comments.
Mr. White's made a motion for deferral of this mock-up, incorporating board and staff comments. Is there a second? Mr. Metter seconds. I'll have a motion and second, so I'll go down the roll. Mr. Favor, how do you vote on this motion for deferral? Mr. Metters. Mr. White.
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Look forward to working with the applicants on next review. We all agree that we have an excellent problem. Thank you. Agenda item number 4.
8 King Street. This is also 666 King Street and 0 F Street. Requesting conceptual approval for construction of a 55-unit affordable housing project. This one's on the west side in Wright District 5 in the Historic Corridor District. And we aerial showing the location. Existing site photos.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Brian Hessler, I'm an architect with McMillan Smith, creative architects for this project. Our owner and representative AHE unfortunately had a medical issue, so he could not be here today. But we do have Remark Studio here to talk about some of the landscape architecture portion as well when we get to that. For the project, I'd like to emphasize that for this particular project, affordable housing means 30 to 80% of the average mean annual income for that. Questions about that from the community. Our client for this project is the city. We're hired by NHE, who's hired by the city. There are improvements on the housing authority property as a scope part of this, but they're not the client for that. So I just want to clarify that before we. This project was presented to the board in the fall of 2021. We were deferred. We took those comments back, and I think we have a design that is in the right direction this time. Due to the scope of the building and the site, I'd like to request a 10-minute time extension from the board.
Certainly. Any idea how much additional time? I like to do
10 minutes, please.
additional 10, sure.
Next, please, slide. Last time when we presented to the board, there was a lot of discussion over the community connectivity to this project. The slide you're seeing now represents how F and H streets historically have not been connected into the fabric of the city. Direction from the board when we came here last was to come back with a clear direction for how this project would integrate with those streets. The city has made it clear to our design team that this project will move forward with those streets being connected as part of the fabric. So we'll see that as we go forward. I know that was one of the stumbling blocks last go around. Next, please. Context for the project. You can see here, there's it has a King Street address, but it doesn't really have any King Street frontage, which is a little unusual. The scope is the wooded lot between the overpass and the housing authority's property, and then also the DOT property underneath the overpass. Next, please. Site plan wise, there are basically two structures on this. The primary building and a dumpster enclosure. Both those are highlighted in yellow here. One of the comments we got last go round from VAR was to really see what we can do with that dumpster enclosure in terms of site planning. We have relocated it within a existing landscape area, so it is no longer prominently visible from the promenade to the plaza from King Street. You can also see some of the context we have here on the perimeter, which is primarily the overpass and the housing authority building. Housing authority buildings are a bright yellow and a bright blue. That will is important when we get to our buildings. So next, please. You can see a little bit of that context here. Currently, the overpass underneath there is a little bleak. See the blue housing authority building in that photo. Next, please. Additional context, photos of the underpass, and next, please. This is a drawing that shows the King Street corridor near our site. We have no direct frontage to it, but our building will be visible behind that and through the new street that's created. Next. Here's a site plan showing our building in yellow, the housing authority buildings, the donut, and those other ones in between us and the King Street. The parking for this project is self-contained within the development. There are approximately 90 spaces. 30 of them are dedicated to the housing authority, 30 of them are dedicated to this new development, and 30 of them are dedicated to public use for access to the low line, restaurants, bars, whatever the public might need in that neighborhood. Next, please. Last time we presented, there was a little bit of confusion in terms of access to the site. So this diagram, we hope, clarifies that. There are two ways to access this site from King Street, and those are highlighted in the blue path. F and H Street will be connected to this project based on direction from the city, but direct access to this development is not needed through F and H Street. It provides a connection to the community, but it's not required for the success or failure of this project. There's also purple lines representing the bike paths and access to the future low-line park system. Remark will talk about that in a little bit more detail, but there's one primary access on the right side of this, south side of the site, that is dedicated exclusively to bikes, where you don't have to cross a parking lot or other things like that. It's a safe, wide, secure approach to that. The other two are more meandering access points to the low line park system. Next, please. First floor plan is a mix of units that have direct access to the exterior via porches and the amenity spaces of the project. Community room, computer room, fitness room, leasing offices, those face the public plaza on the screen. Next, please. The floors 2, 3, and 4 are all 100% units. It's a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. When we get to the 5th level, next please. The 4th level drops off, and there are a few units on the 5th level. One more, please. One more. So the 5th floor massing, you can see there is a little taller than the other portion to help relate to the neighborhood to the west or on plan west north. Next, please. Low slope roof. All the units are located on the tallest portion of the building, screened and pretty unobtrusive. Next, please. Some site sections here showing the context of our building in relationship to what's around there. Note 677 King Street, you can kind of see the scale of that, which is the closest large building across the street. And the overpass is obviously a large structure. Next, please. The old elevations and the new elevations are shown below. The old ones are below and the newer ones are above. Had a lot of comments from the board on terms of the how the elevations were developed. So we took those and developed them in such a way that the brick patterns on the bottom have a series of reveals, rustication. The windows on the 1st and 5th floor are a little different than the other floors. The railing systems are consistent, unified with each other, and also the language of the entry canopies at the public amenity portion of the building. And we have a more developed cap to the building. Not an overly massive cornice, but something we think is appropriate for this scale and size of this building. Next, please. And that language is carried through all the facades. One of the other comments we got from the board last time was the depth of the punch windows. So that has been increased from about 6 inches to 8 inches. So it's a little hard to see that here, but I want to point that comment has been addressed. Next, please. Same thing on this facade. One more, please. And I think we'll see a 3D version of it that'll maybe make it a little easy. One more, please, Lauren. You can see this in 3D a little bit better with the brick rustication, the shadows, the unified balconies. We also got some questions last time on the fiber cement siding. We have revised that to a oral polyash product, a 3/4 inch thick product. It has a nickel reveal and we're running horizontally, so it matches the more residential siding, but on a little bit larger scale. It also has the ability to have nice, clean, and crisp corners where we don't have to have a lot of clapboard trim pieces on there that I think works with this aesthetic well. You can see the brick steps. Where previously we just had simple concrete steps. Next, please. This is a view approaching the project from King Street. You can see the dumpster enclosure has been relocated. And you can see the F Street is opened up on this drawing. Next, please. Another view as you get closer to the project. Housing authority buildings would be on the right. The access to the plaza is to the left there. You can kind of see how the massing of the 4- and 5-story portion that have broken down there. Next, please. This is a view looking through H Street, which would be open at this point. Previously, it's closed. You know, the wooded area. Next, please. The green you're seeing on these, I alluded to this a little bit earlier. It's trying to integrate with some of the colors of the neighborhood, particularly the housing authorities, kind of bright palette. This drawing shows the shadows, the brick reveals, the depth of the windows, the different types of windows in a little bit more clarity than I think we were able to do last area. Next, please. There's what we're calling a courtyard between the building and the overpass that Remark will talk about a little bit more detail here. So that there are multiple exterior spaces for the public and the residents. Next, please. It's a view of the project from the future low line. Next, please. Another view of the project from the low line, looking back at that courtyard. This is a view of the plaza area, permeable pavers, and the canopy language has been added to this this elevation of the building, where previously it was only at the main entry. So we think that makes this look a little more even scale and welcoming than what we had. We were also asked last time to take a closer look at what we're doing under the overpass with our only frontage on King Street. This area has been a bit of a challenge. So some of the things we're working with here are we're trying to create an urban edge. We're also trying to make it safe for the parking lot as well. So have something low and create the urban edge. And we have a lot of restrictions from DOT for what we can and cannot do on the property. So our current proposal, you can see this with multiple projects that are under overpasses around town. They look generally pretty bleak. They only really allow them to put some fencing in. So we're taking a different approach to that, where we're going to have a series of planter boxes that don't have the foundations that DOT objects to. You can block the glare from the headlights, but still promote the safety and security from the parking lot that we think fix it. Next, please. We were also asked last time to see if we can make that wall or surface along King Street turn into the connections to the low line in the parking lot. We plan to introduce some type of intervention at that point and carry the planters and site wall through that area. What that final form may not look like this, but it represents the idea of something to transform that market's kind of gateways. Next, please. And then finally, last time we were asked to address this building as a potential gateway to the city of Charleston. So people approaching from the overpass. Once you get past that billboard, then you get a good look at this building. So that's the first view you see at the top. Fortunately, that billboard's going to be here. We don't have to get rid of that. But you can see the detail we put into the cap of the building, and then the other view is kind of as you're going around the building towards the rear. You only get a real brief glimpse of this building from the overpass with the billboard in the way and the direction of the one-way traffic. But we think we've made some improvements there to address the concerns we saw last time. That, I think I want to turn it over to Stephen real quickly to talk about 3 focused areas of the site from the landscapers.
Thank you, Mr. Professor.
As Brian said, I'm Stephen. I'm with Remark. We're just going to focus on the 3 main areas, as you see here. There are enlargements of these main areas, so I'll touch on the main highlights of each kind of space. And first one is the main entrance. As Brian stated, this is one of the main connections off of King Street, located at Main Promenade. One of the main things is that we provide access to the low line, and as you see, straight through there, we provide that through and it's as wide as it is due to the fact that we have a fire access easement that we have to provide. To the left, we have a series of rain gardens and some seating elements that almost mimic some railroad ties, kind of tying back into the whole idea of what the low line used to be. Kind of a railway system. And then the rain gardens carry over in kind of front entryway. Some of the plants that we're focusing with for the rain gardens, as well as all natives. Very durable. This just shows a section to represent kind of the spatial representation through that area, showing that fire access easement and kind of what we built. The second area of focus is the what we're calling the courtyard, creating a space for not just the residents, but for people that are on the load line to look in, and we're thinking about what will they see. But for the residents that will be in this building, we propose to keep this fairly open, but also considering it to be low maintenance. An all gravel area, considered to be an area for recreation, lounging, some slight furnishings in there. Another key elements are the existing oaks that we show. I can't see them. I think they're H, but they are existing. They are a little close to the building, but they're able to be saved. I just think that'll be somewhat nice to see some greenery pop up over the I-26 overpass. And it also provides a little bit of screening. Just shows a couple plants that we could plant in some planters right up against the building. Again, focusing on the low maintenance aspect of it, while still providing some greenery. The last area is the parking underneath the I-26 overpass, connection to the low line. As Brian stated, the main connection to the low line off of King Street is at that bottom right-hand corner. And then another key element is the plant boxes or decorative planters that we have on King Street. Again, going with all native plants, showing what can be planted in a more shaded area, given that we have that I-26 overpass. And again, low maintenance. These are a couple sections. One from it's more of the section elevation, the bike path and drive aisle, just showing that representation. How that works. It's a 10-foot wide bike path, followed by, to the left of it, it's a foot wide kind of planting strip. And within that planting strip, we propose to have some sort of boundary or border fence type of deal that kind of separates or provides that separation from the bike path to that drive aisle. And, overall safety is key. So we felt like that cuts down on interviewing of pedestrians and vehicles. The second one is the section elevation looking from King Street into the parking area. Again, we needed to come up with a way to cut down on the overall visibility of parking while still being able to see through. So we have a series of planters that are different heights to give it some sort of wave fun aspect to it. Of course, everything in these planters are all native plants. Next, please. And then areas that we focused on for more of a fun, Instagrammable, or more precedent for the low line in the future are these different types of elements that you can incorporate at entrance or nodes to the low line. So just going from top left to the right and then to the bottom. So, these are very conceptual, but we're looking at areas where we could provide this gateway with two L's. These two L's could be multifunctional, where we incorporate bike racks into them. The second one to the right of that is multifunctional bike rack, but then also functions as that screening element from the low line. And then going left to right on that bottom, going back to that that Instagrammable moment, just a large L, just kind of signifies, hey, this is the low line. It's kind of fun, unique, very artistic. Then the second one, incorporating possibly a metal panel, giving some decorative aspect. Maybe there could be some sort of overall map of where you are in relation to the overall low line. And then looking at different ways of incorporating different materials and colors in these third and fourth images of when you're arriving at this picture from the front, you see an L, but as you come from the rear, you also want to see an L. So front aspect is the one on the left, the one on the right is coming. So you see two L's. And then all the way on the right are a series of planters that we're looking to use really site-wide, but more along the bike path and in between the low line.
Okay, right on the button, 20 minutes. Very good. Any written public, I'm sorry, we've incorporated any written comment. Okay. Live public comment from the audience. Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Gianna Shaw Johnson. I'm the director for the city's Department of Housing and Community Development. Our department helped to facilitate, with the support of several other departments, the selection of this team to build the low-line affordable housing that you see here. And so we thank you for your initial review and certainly would thank you for your support of this evening. As you all know, although I understand that you don't necessarily need numbers relative to affordable housing, the need is pretty substantial. So we are very excited about the opportunity that is presented here. A great deal of work has gone into this even prior to these gentlemen being selected by our design center. A great deal of partnership opportunities as well with the Charleston Housing Authority, who owns the property at 670 and 676 King Street, which we believe is these various new pieces are added there with the parking and with the landscaping will prove beneficial to those sites as well. Additionally, more recently, a number of our team members met with, along with elected officials, the HF&I neighborhood to discuss those intersections where ingress, egress to those communities would occur as well. So we thank you for your time and your review and would certainly appreciate your support of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Chance.
Any further public comment?
Ms. Minigan.
Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. First, we would like to thank the applicant for reaching out to us on this proposal. The Preservation Society would like to state our continued support for this program. There is a pressing need for affordable and workforce housing in Charleston, and this project will contribute a significant number of affordable units in the heart of downtown. Reiterating our previous comments, we feel the massing is successfully broken down between the 4- and 5-story portions, and the breaks in plane along the elevations create good vertical proportions. We appreciate the applicant introducing detailing to the top of the building to address previous board comments, but we encourage this to be taken further in enhancing the design and depth of the cornice line. Punched openings were also a topic of discussion at the last meeting. And while improvements have been made, we continue to feel the punched openings at the porches create voids that are unsuccessful. We again suggest resetting the porches with a more traditional treatment. Pertaining to the west facade facing King Street, we feel the composition of openings of the 3 bays need further study. Rational, repetitive fenestration is characteristic of Charleston architecture. And the fenestration patterns of the 3 bays should have a more balanced, related rhythm. Finally, we are concerned by the dramatic contrast of the proposed material color palette. While we certainly feel there is room for creativity, especially because this project is located along the low line, the dark gray brick and bright green accents is very stark, and we would suggest softening the proposed palette to better relate to the context. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marion. Further public comment?
Hi, my name is Cathedra Miller. I live at 94 Nassau Street. And I just have a question. I keep hearing the term affordable housing. I grew up on the east side and seeing the way that the community has changed with all the transients and the college students, I'm just interested to know where we're getting the data for the income used when we have so many renters of college students in the area to say what the median income is.
Ms. Miller, thank you for your question. I'm in the unfortunate position of having to tell you that not only does this board not have that information, it's technically not subject to our purview, but your question is duly noted. And maybe somebody from the city can get that information passed on, even though that's not our department. But thank you for your comment. Further public comment on this agenda item? Hearing none. City staff comments or recommendations?
Sure. I'd like to say that Ms. Johnson probably has that information for you, Ms. Miller, and she's happy to share it with you. And just an observation from last time, staff also is very happy with the massing and height and scale of the project. We feel like it's appropriately broken down and it responds to the site contextually and how it's laid out on the property. So some staff comments for this review specifically. Number one, the newly proposed utilizes a different and more pronounced language at the ground floor, effectively giving the building a base and a more pronounced and higher detail cornice with some contemporary brick rebuilds. These revisions may help soften the proposed bolder color palette. Number two, the punched openings at the windows are shown as 8 inches in depth. As board comment previously emphasized the importance of these deep rebuilds in light of the overall design intent. Board should consider if this depth will achieve the intention of punched openings. 8 inches is a minimum to be considered. 3, staff is not opposed to a non-traditional accent color, especially on a building adjacent to the low line and Interstate 26. However, much scrutiny will be required for these accent shades in order to find balance between jarring and the additional context of historic homes. Staff is concerned about the depicted shade, and after contemplating whether limiting its use would help or harm the design, staff recommends toning it down, but will look for additional information in the preliminary submittal. And 4, for final detailing, staff recommends coordinating the openings at the ground floor with the brick reveal at the headers if possible. We're recommending conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. The applicant may respond to either public comment or city staff comments if they so desire.
I think we'll consider all the Preservation Society's comments, the board's comments, and the city's comments. I don't think any of them are unreasonable.
Thank you.
You'll have potential to make the project better.
Thank you. Board discussion and a potential vote on this agenda item.
Disappointing. I like unreasonable comments. That's why I come here every 2 weeks. Actually, I think the project has responded to previous comments very well. That green just sort of jumps out at you, but it's so hard to assess that on paper or on screen. We're really going to have to wait, and I hate to do this. We're going to have to wait until we see the mock-up to determine what the shade really should look like. But I have become a really strong advocate for some color in this place after 10 years of brown buildings. But I think a lot of PSC's comments were valid and staff comments were valid, and I think the project with those comments embedded and whatever else we say, I think it's ready for conceptual in my view.
Further board comments.
Chairman, I'd like to ask a couple of questions, sir.
Like Mr. Metters.
Mark's pretty good at DO 1, 2 or the base number 9. And this is the architectural nature.
How I'm going to view the building as I'm coming in on either F or H or the 2 connectors coming off of street. F Street, H Street, and both those connectors coming off of King Street going to be 2-way.
Both connections from King Street are 2-way.
Clark's sheet DO 1, 2 or that base number 9.
Marion.
Both connections from King Street are two-way.
One more, Lawrence. Thanks.
Right, the blue lines represent connections to King Street. They are two-way, ingress and egress from both those exits. F and H Street, I know there's been some meetings with the community groups. The city, I think, has given them some opportunity for input in terms of whether those streets are one-way, two-way, parking on two sides, parking on one side. And that's something, beyond the scope of this project, but that may be resolved in the next year or so, I think.
Mr. Chairman, it's one of my favorite things to do when I get tired and think I don't have anything to do, to go walk up one-way streets and look at structures that you don't otherwise would appreciate, like the neighborhood does. I think that for my comments, Mr. Chairman, this site is the primary entrance into the city. Been challenged in the last couple of years with making sure that these points of entry had meaning structures, because they're going to be. And I personally don't think that this is a meaningful structure. I think that you have delivered on what we asked you to deliver on last time, but I don't see something that's overwhelming to me when I come in. Charleston's affordable housing sites include some of the best in anywhere. Street, Rutledge, and Rutledge Street, Mount Pleasant Street, surrounded by Queen Street and Bufane Street and Smith Street and Linwood Street. That's some unbelievable stock, and that's kind of what I think about entry points and having this great affordable housing there. But how do we make it so that 100 years from now, somebody's saying about that structure what I'm saying about some of these that have been 50 years or 75 years? I also think that the green is a little bit strong, but I'm like Jay. I look forward to experiencing different kinds of opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Further board comments?
This is Yuna Sobchak. I think this project nice forms. I don't have that big objection about gateway. Every building can be gateway. Unless you build another, skyscraper, then it will be. Otherwise, it's doesn't matter what you do to the. So it's see the building. Yes. Hi. It's pretty acceptable. Other than that, I agree with all the comments. I would like to.
Further board comments?
Prior application, but I did look back at it and compare what is here now. And I understand Mr. Mather's concern, but tend to agree with Ms. Subchak that not every building has to be, and that's not to discredit what you're doing. I mean, some are more background buildings and depending on site and location. But from a conceptual standpoint, I think it addressed the questions and points that were made last time. And you still have the opportunity to further develop that. It might be helpful at preliminary approval, so you don't have to wait till the sample panel, that there's some type of color study that just, hey, we've got two different palettes we're looking at and kind of lean it towards this. You can get some feedback before we get further down the road, maybe some direction on that. But I would support conceptual approval.
Yeah, there's green and then there's green.
And it's still paper.
Yeah, that's right. Paper
It's hard to know until you see it in real life.
I'll introduce a motion for conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
There's a motion for conceptual approval with board staff comments from Mr. White. Is there a second? Having a motion and a second, I'll run down the roll. Mr. Metters, how do you vote on this motion? Mr. Faven? Mr. White? Ms. Sobchak? And myself, yea, in favor. Passes unanimously. We'll look forward to working with you through the preliminary. Mr. Parrish, agenda item number 5. Mr. White is recusing himself, as is Ms. Sobchak. Will let those who had to recuse step aside and our audience members transition.
All right, we're moving on to agenda item number 5, 275 Hugie Street, requesting preliminary approval for construction of a 77-unit affordable housing apartment building with surface parking. This is in the East Central Neighborhood, Height District 4, and the Historic Corridor District.
We've got some context slides for you.
We're showing the location on the south side of Hugie Street, meeting to the east. Looking into the site as it is today, this current building was west on Hugie. And looking west, just got totally looking east. Okay, Mr. Eddie Bello is presenting this one.
Mr. Chairman, I want to note that Mr. Bello has 91 slides. I'm going to go through each one. But
Lots of extra time.
You asking for extra time now?
Mr. Metters is going to ask you questions about 5 of those. No, well, first again, I'm Eddie Bello with Belgaris Architects. It's great to see everybody in person. It's been a long time. It's nice to see you all. I also have on our team Nick Litza, who's the project architect, and Jordan Stucco, I think I said your name right. So, and then we have the folks from Remark who are going to say a few things. So I'll try to go quickly. I'm going to repeat a little bit of the conceptual stuff just because Mr. David was not here last time. But we are asking for preliminary approval. We're asking for details of staff because we've done so much work. But I'll try to go quickly. I won't get each one of those slides. All right, next slide, Lawrence. Just to remind everyone, so this again, affordable housing project we're super excited about our design. I'm personally very interested in affordable housing, and it's great to be involved with this. As I said last time, conceptually, we got a lot of inspiration from the history site. This is historically, this used to be the neck, so the neck moved north. It's always very industrial. And so the aesthetic that we have for this building was derived from the sort of the industrial nature. Next slide, Lawrence. That's good. Keep me going. Let's get
Speed presentation.
Like I said last time, we've got some historic buildings on Meeting Street, the Grant homes that we are away from, but sensitive to. Otherwise, we've got a lot of fairly large apartment buildings around us. Again, more context. Next slide, please. These are the buildings that are actually on our block and across the street. Next slide. Again, you see where we are. So Hugie is the street to the left, and this is a good graphic because it shows the larger buildings that have been built recently, as everyone knows. And then just to the south of us, to the right, are several other fairly large apartment buildings. And again, this is what we said last time, that they're all very
fairly boxy, they feel very heavy. I'm not really criticizing the buildings. It's a tough program to have with the parking and everything. One of the things that we wanted to do with our building was to be very distinctive from those large sort of boxy buildings. That's a little fresher. Next slide. So I'm going to go to the next one because I think it's previous and proposed. So I'll talk about the changes more. So this is our current site plan. Again, like I said last time, a lot of those other buildings, they have typical apartment building approach where you have a double loaded core, you have a long interior hallway with rooms on either side. We broke our building into two and have all of our, so we wouldn't have that condition. And then we have all of our circulation as a central spine in this sort of open air gallery type space. So, and we also, so we front, of course, as we should, we front UG Street, and then we also have a secondary entrance from the parking lot east there, which actually really by chance worked out so that it aligns with the arch. See at the top of the page there. So next slide, I think this shows existing previous and proposed. No, okay, well anyway, so just stay on this one for 1 second. So again, the idea is this shed, we've got now 4 masses going by the shed for the structure. Next slide. We have, this was all approved at conceptual, but an entry element that terraces up. We intentionally did not put this over parking. We wanted to keep it close to the ground as we could. So address the street well. We broke it up in certain ways. Very, very simple structure. Okay, so one of the, I think the next one, Lawrence will show a previous and proposed. Right, okay. So at the top, this is what we presented last time, what we're presenting now. And I'll get into this a little bit more, but last time there was some concerns or just some thoughts about how the interior space would feel, especially over time. And then we took that apart. And so one of the things we did is we pulled the building further apart as far as we can. We have 35 feet here now, which is a lot. We also eliminated this heated addition space, and now it's completely open. So now we have all, basically we have 4 components with a lot of our work has been developing. Next slide. I'll try to go through these. So the floor plan, in the back, there are the, just our floor, this current floor plan, so this is showing previous and proposed. Really, I think the takeaway here is you can see all open, very much open space, and you can tell we've increased it as much as we can. Next slide. This is the other floor plans. Next one. Similar. This is important to point out. So this is underneath the roof, sort of the attic plan. So we don't have any mechanical units that you can see from anywhere. We presented this last time. The mechanical units are up inside under our roof in this flat. Also, the mechanical connects across. So that was something we started conceptually with, which we've now worked out with our engineers, which was a big, kind of really nice thing to do. Also, I know staff hates dryer vents and those types of things. All of the vents, everything is interior. That's something else. Next slide. So Lawrence doesn't have to put that big red X. Roof plan proposed, previous and proposed. Again, like I said last time, a lot of study on this. The roof, open, because we don't want this to be a dark space, but it's not here. So we want to make sure there's that balance between how much light you get. Next slide. Okay, so this was some of Mr. Matter's comments last time. I was just wondering how that space works. So we, besides pulling it apart, we also, and opening it up more, did some solar studies. So this shows the summer solstice 21st, and it should, the orange shows there's 4 hours of sun. That area, that orange. It shows sort of how wind might flow. Next slide. Winter, the next one, which only has 2.5 hours because the sun's lower, but that's still a good bit of sun. I think it's more important to have it in the summer, actually, because it's a wetter season. And of course, we worked with the landscape folks to make sure the plants that were selected would thrive in that. Next slide. So I think that was one of the big things we got from last time, was think about that a little bit more. This is just an enlarged plan of the front entrance. These are conceptual plans, but just to repeat. So UG's here, you know, we intentionally were addressing UG. I feel like a lot of our large villages are close to the street. We pulled ours back a little bit as much as we could, and then you know they're staggered, and then this is a fairly grand but understated sort of step terrace as you go into that space. Next slide. This is the southern side, not really in Wardsburg, but just to show you how it works. Next slide. And then the upper floors, these are just enlarged plans, so I'll go through these quickly. I think the takeaway from all our drawings I've talked over the size, we've done a lot of work since we started developing the project. Next slide, Lawrence, please. Next slide. Just an enlarged area of the front. Next slide. I think this shows how the entrance, this is the section through that entrance. So front with an outdoor terrace. This is section through the joint. Next slide. All right, so here's the front, and I think the next slide is landscape. Yes.
Stephen with Remark. Focus on some key highlights of the project as far as the landscape goes. With this slide, we just show a couple of precedent images focused more on that semi-private garden area from Fuji into that main courtyard slash atrium space. Next slide. Again, more precedent imagery geared more towards the atrium itself and showing how it can be planted very dense, green, and low maintenance. There is a park element in the rear of the building. We propose that it could be a more natural environment, more free play, rather than bring in these large, dense structures. Shows the overall site plan, focuses more on what each element is. We focused on the plant palette, again, all native, very low maintenance, and then the hardscape materials using gravel for permeable paver parking spaces, or permeable gravel, sorry, parking spaces. A wood deck in that atrium portion, and scored concrete at that Fuji Street connection. The overall slide here shows that main atrium or interior courtyard space, focused more on the planting aspect and what we proposed in there. As Eddie stated before, we studied those sun shade analysis and determined where we could place what we're proposing as palm trees. We feel as though they would get that initial sunlight that's needed for palms to grow. They are spaced strategically to get the most amount of sun as needed. And then everything else is fairly low growing, but also spreads. As, again, low maintenance. We would go with some sort of gravel mulch to provide, again, that low maintenance aspect and create an overall very clean look. Space. Again, the key is to make it very full and create.
More spots. No, I'll go quickly. Really now it's just more detail. This is just a section that we cut showing how that terracing works. We were excited to know that we've got some trees in there. Next slide. So this is street checking is required. We really don't need it. Proposed and previous. So the materials are, well, I'll do that at the very end. Next slide. This is the front. Next slide. This is the east. And one of the comments last time was about those pilasters and how to be a little more pronounced. So we've done that, and they're a little more, they're deeper, and we have a cast stone canopy. How we figured out how all that steel really work. Our color palette is fairly muted. We are trying to tie into the Grant homes, which is a white brick. And so right now we've got this brick as an initial selection. I want it to be very simple. The windows are black with interior, which really is not a lot of your purview. We did these in the spirit of, now that we have things in person, I can bring things that I didn't submit. But we did do a lot of studies. I hate that Jay's not reviewing this because, like him, I like a lot of color. I'm very tired of all our brown buildings. So on the inside, we've got brick all the way around, but these are affordable housing. So we've got to be real careful about budget. Inside is all cementitious paint. So what we've done is we have sort of a piazza blue, 4 shades of piazza blue pattern that goes from light to a little more intense as you go. I don't know how much you're going to see that as a board. Somebody there, but we think writing approach to making sure that space is really lively. We talked about that a lot. Quickly, I'll go through just a few details. Next slide. Brackets. Next slide, Ron. Next one. And of course, I'll stop if y'all have a detailed question. Next slide. Here's the detail showing how those pilasters were. Big overhangs. Very simple shed roof structure. I mean, it's a gable, but the feeling of a shed. Here's a view of that side east entry, which really will be heavily used because that's where the parking lot is. There's a comment last time to maybe consider breaking up the roof, and we studied that. We didn't want to do that for a couple of reasons. One, now we have 4 masses. Roof joins them together. I think a lot of times the notion of breaking up buildings is appropriate for some of these larger buildings that are up on the street and they feel too heavy. This is on the street. The part that's broken, the part that is on the street is broken up. So we just felt like that it took away from that shed idea. Also, we've got to connect the mechanical up there. And so if we pulled that roof back, not only would it not provide cover for the entrance, it would create some problems with hiding all of our mechanical. Next slide. Some other details. We have to even sort of started thinking about how to handle the weapons, those types of things. Next slide. Next slide. It's just brick veneer. Windows. Next slide. This is the entrance, a little hard to read on this slide, but that side entrance has this very vibrant wood and steel canopy and wall to mark that entrance. So the pedestrian level, it is very broken up. Next slide. Just another view. We also have this other wood screen. Just a little another. Next slide. Again, that's pushed pretty far back. Here's a detail for how that might work. Next slide. You can see that wood screen again. There's the front where the little arrow is. We've got a right now some wood softened under that steel canopy fronting the street. Next slide. More details. If there are questions, so pretty straightforward. We worked hard on making sure the details worked right and we're clean and elegant. Next slide. This shows that canopy. Next slide. Detail. So this is a section through that front, and this is how that canopy works. It's two columns and then a stained canopy, which I think will hold up well because it's underneath. Next slide. This just shows, I showed last time, it's more developed now, how the mechanical works up in here. Standing down here, you'll maybe. We don't have to see the mechanical anyway. We've also, not that it matters yet for the board, but we've also figured out where all the electrical panels go and all that, so it's not. Next slide. Just more details. We have some cast stone elements. You can see that we have a belt horse that goes around this cast stone. Next slide. I don't know how much of this we need to get into, just showing. Again, we're asking for final details to staff, so we're just showing that we have figured out what we need to. Next slide. And really, you can just go through these quickly unless there's some reason. One thing that was brought up last time by staff was saying that it would be nice to cover those interior stairs. That's problematic for a couple of reasons. But another reason is we're worried that it's going to feel even darker. And our goal in that whole space is to have it as open as possible. And we've done similar stairs like this in other projects, and they worked out fine. Williams Stairs is a perfect example. These are just like Williams Stairs. Next slide. So it's not like we didn't pay attention to that. We studied it. Just we couldn't do it. Next slide. Also, I don't know how much you can see that. Next one. Sorry, Lawrence. Get to the end here. Yeah. I think we have just a couple of renderings at the end. I'll just end on those. Yeah, we figured out most everything we need. Next slide. There's that entry, that entry there, the middle, left. Pretty dynamic wall there. Next slide. Try to see. Yeah. We showed something similar to this last time. And the last one, I think, is a rendering too. Either one of those is fine. Actually, go to the next one. Just end on that. Okay. I said I know I went over the time, but I'll blame the remark guys. All right. Thank you. John, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Bello. If we have questions, we'll get to them here shortly. Public comment on this agenda item.
There's no written comment.
Public comment from our citizen visitors this evening. Hear none. City staff comments and recommendations.
Okay, I'm gonna actually use that board in a second, but I'll read these first. 3 comments. Number 1, planting strips are proposed at the north entry terraces and within the boardwalk. To some degree, these reduce the overall width of the UG Street entry, but provide nicely integrated green space for the main elevation. Staff recommends added scrutiny and coordination between the architectural site plan and landscape plans to ensure a clear and distinct entry path from UG Street. Per previous board comment, board motion and staff comment, transitions of materials at horizontal location should be offset in plain or meaningfully detailed. Concern remains regarding the transition from brick to siding at the fourth floor north end. Please confirm detail or visibility. And 3, while not visible from the public right away at the ground floor at the intersection of the central corridor and the east entry, staff recommends pulling back the southern planting bed to respect what will most likely be the flow of foot traffic. So just to. So I don't think that I saw this.
No,
set.
we just did it.
And there may have been something similar, but in coordinating between this section through the stair and a couple of other renderings and a plan and landscape plans, it did feel like there's a lot of cool stuff happening here, but it did feel like this was the only clear and distinct entry path, and it felt very thin and minimal in the overall opening, which is very grand and lush and nice. But I just really wanted to confirm that got the scrutiny it needed to, number one, if you're coming from this way and you're entering the project, do you step through these terraces, or is this the only 5-foot wide entry? So the comment really is in the vein of, should this be a little wider and grander if it's the only clear distinct path? And number 2, this remains for me just an issue at the fourth floor. I'm not entirely sure how much of visibility it has from the sidewalk because this rendering is, but where the material changes in the horizontal plane from brick to the sky blue sidings just remains a little bit of a struggle for me. For staff.
Hold on, we'll get to that.
Third comment, I don't think I need to point out it, but it's out of our, it's not visible from the street, but if you're looking at the architectural site plan, surely you could go back to the landscape site plan on the first floor. Oh, it's pointed out, clearly. Not a requirement, not a directive, just how far back it was. Okay, but that's good. Thinking about people coming from the parking lot and coming this way, that just seems like an area where people are going to step through, and recommendation to pull it back and put hardscape. That's all for staff. We are recommending preliminary approval with board and staff comments.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. The applicant now has a total of 5-minute period to respond or clarify. I know they're peppered with a few questions, including from staff. So,
well, I think a couple things. One, if you could go to the front, any of those views that shows the front. So we laid out the front. And these guys made it better. Go back one more. So it's good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that excellent.
Okay, so you can walk, there are 2 things. If we make this all walkway, then there's no place to sit, and it kind of kills, I know that's not what you're saying, but. So we are very intentional about having it be a clear, straight, direct path. And we're gonna have handrails and all that kind of stuff. If we have a lot of other things, then we end up having a lot more impediments. So the goal would be, if I live here, I'm gonna walk back and forth every day. Now, if I wanted to, I could certainly walk this way. It's not like you're stepping over bushes or anything. I think we'll just study it as a team. I'm not discounting it, but I think what you're talking about is what we're doing anyway. Just so you know, we talked about the cutting through. And I talked about this a lot. The level of the walkway, it's going to be about 1 foot higher than the level of, or higher, maybe 18 inches than the dirt where the plants are. So take the easiest route, and if they have to climb and step, they're not going to go that way. No. That was a thing.
The horizontal transition up at the fourth floor.
Oh, right. So you can't really tell, this is not a clear thing, but, so where that changes, the brick turns back. It's not a brick and then a joint. It actually recesses a little bit and we're good. And there's a very, you can't, first of all, you're not going to see Hamilton Street because of the way it is, but it's not just like a butt joint with a car. I will repeat my request to please consider final details of staff because it's not major issues. I don't know.
I might interject. I didn't realize that was part of the request, but we don't have a concern about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And I know Mr. Bellows mentioned that twice in phases of his presentation. So we hear the applicant loud and clear on that request. Having concluded the applicant's response, we will move to board discussions and a potential vote on this agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, I got a couple of questions for Eddie. Eddie, it's nothing we hadn't talked about before. Lawrence, it's either A903 or A913. Seems to show that screening that you were talking about, which would connect your primary or main route to that floating route. So the question is, that screening prevent birds, bats, other pests accessing the area in between the top of that building and the bottom of the screen, or is that?
Talking about what?
If we're standing on, you got two runs of buildings and they got a roof on it on top of that fourth floor. Got this roof coming up. Is there access or is it screened? I see it's ventilated and I see it in various ways as I study the plan, but
I couldn't tell you what the detail is. Nick and I went through this. So there's not like
there's not an actual detail section on, or you can go to 314 and it shows the enclosure kind of on the outside wall, but on the inside wall, it doesn't show anywhere that I could find. And I'm just wondering, I mean, is there big, it's just a 4 or 5 foot gap that, you know, I'm thinking about Coolbla right now. And I'm thinking about Dixon Youth Government's office on East Bay Street, and you go in there and it's like an aviary. You know, what's going to prevent that area from being a collection point for bats and birds?
just stop at one of these, Lawrence, that shows the intersection. I don't know that we have that. We get to a section.
It's hard to do like an A906 that showed that it looked like it was screened.
Yeah, it goes all the way, you can kind of see it goes all the way up here. Now, and actually Nick and I talked about that detail there. I wanted to slow down just not worry about water. For everybody to sit on. But no, we're concerned about birds. We talked about different ways to either Nick suggested this sort of thing that you just have running how it works, or you have to look by you.
Right, but I mean, right.
Whole element enclosed above your building.
Yes. This is closed now.
Oh, and the full length, the full.
Yeah, all the way there. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I didn't know that's what you're saying. Or if it's not completely, we can, that's something we can do. I'm not pretty sure.
There are a couple places on, like, say, the UG elevation where that enclosure is pushed back behind the truss there. So there's a little tiny section that's open.
Yeah.
It's a few feet, but.
Yeah, that's right, the north and south, so that we get that recess to exaggerate that roof overhang, but it's not.
But so I'm trying to make sure I ask my question directly. It's like there's a triangle of wire mesh on those two elevations right there, and it encloses that area. It might be 2 feet back or 3 feet back, but ultimately it's there and it keeps pests out. And then if you're running north-south, same thing.
North-south, it's only about 8 inches.
But I mean, all the way, and then turn it back. Okay.
Goes all the way to the other side of the roof.
So I like outbreaks in it, so I thought that was great. When you hear about wood decks going in on the inside, it's troublesome only because sun study to me, when I looked at it, I mean, it shows when you take the porches into consideration how the sun can't get in there, even though it might be 4 hours to some of it. It's not 4 hours to all of it all the time. Decks are the things that you're concerned about deteriorating. Thank you for doing this unsteady. It's great to see that interior courtyard. I mean, I think it's great. You got that draping vegetation that you put on from those upper floors that come down and you kind of wonder who's going to make it. But it looks great. And I think it's a great.
Further board comments?
Yeah, and I didn't see it during conceptual, so thank you for showing it. And right off the bat, that was one of my initial questions. Was that area above each building enclosed? And it sounds like it is. And that's, but really appreciate the sensitivity and the kind of creativity with setting back from the street, not building up or parking, all these elements to engage and kind of activate that space. Question on, and I think it's intentional, but as far as just question whether there is any thought given to relief along the length of the buildings itself and the facades or the elements there, the depth of the windows and some of those other things we've talked about. And my take on it is it's intentional that it's blocks like that. And again, almost like a backdrop to the Grant building or the Grant homes and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of a comment, but also a question if you don't mind.
Well, that is right. It isn't. I mean, it's a long building.
Right.
And so we have those pilasters that are pretty deep. And then we have this really grand brackets, right? And so we felt like those elements were enough to give it interest. We felt like if we started adding too much on it, it would feel longer and bigger. And also that's, even if you're gonna see it, it's sort of a secondary facade.
I'll also say I'd like to and understand obviously for economics and whatnot, but the change of material and the blue, I mean, I think that kind of will reflect that light and bounce it around nicely and create some nice atmosphere within that area. And the areas of concern, maybe by staff, it's valid, but if you're saying that we've got a decent relief where it turns and it's obviously just not a veneer, that certainly helps. But yeah, I think it's a great project.
Mr. Bello, I would just say that everything you've done, whether you decided to adopt it or not, you considered everything that you brought before us, which is the usual case. I continue to think this is exemplary design for public housing and kind of what we should accept as a standard. I appreciate the fact that at a conceptual level, you differentiated this from property around it, made it as sympathetic as you could, given your constraints to the Grant homes. So thank you for the refinement and the continued refinement, and I'm very pleased with this project. I think I too share some of the long-term concerns that anyone would have about maintenance of these elements, but I think that to the extent you can compensate for them now, I think it's a great project. Any further board comments or a motion?
I make a motion, Mr. Chairman, for
Final to staff. I'm dependent on one person for a second.
Yeah, your second, delighted. Isn't any kind of negativity or voices of concern public.
So a proper motion from Mr. Metters for preliminary approval with board and staff comments with final review to staff, with a second of that motion from Mr. Fava. So I'll vote in reverse order on that. Mr. Fava, how do you vote on this motion?
I'm in favor.
Mr. Metters and myself, yea in favor. It passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll see you at the next stage.
Okay, thank you all very much.
It's 244 St. Philip Street. Conceptual approval for construction of a 50-unit apartment building. This one's in Cannonboro, LA Borough, Height District 2.5 to 3, Old City District. get you some context slides. This is a section of St. Philip and Lime Street at the project site. And that was quick. All right, for this one, we will have Mr. Dylan Tao. I'm not sure who's presenting. All right.
Thanks everyone, Ben Lutrow, representing Great Star Evening Post, familiar with each other on this project. So we're back for building 3, requesting conceptual approval. Since we last met, we met again with city staff. We went back and reviewed in detail all the comments from HCF, PSC, city staff, and obviously most importantly, all of the board as well. And just want y'all to know we have listened. We have directly addressed the comments. I think you'll see that tonight. Might be a fairly quick presentation because we just attacked the comments one by one. But we do think we have a superior building. We hope y'all agree with us. And I'll turn it over to Gary.
Gary Brewer from Robert Stone Architects. Just put on my glasses. Next, please. The site is at corner of Line and St. Philip Street. Next, please. These are the previous elevations from the last presentation. Next, please. The plan of the building is much the same with a few exceptions having to do with how we modified the 4 elevations based on the comments that we heard. Next, please. This is before and after, with the before elevation on the bottom and the new proposed elevation on the top. This is facing St. Philip Street. The comments were generally along the lines of simplification, considering removing the gable and the stepped parapets, about the proportions of the porches. Next, please. And here you can see the before on the bottom and the proposed on the top. So we have narrowed the proportions of the porches. We've moved the southern porch over by 1 bay so as not to crowd the adjacent existing houses or house. We have changed all the windows to be double hung 6/6, and we have U shutters on all windows that are double hung. We removed the gable on the portion of the building that's on Line in St. Philip, and we've done a single expression of a terrace, or a porch at that location. Next, please. On the left is the before porch, and on the right is the proposed. So we've made it narrower. We made the square columns slightly wider, and then at the base of the building, we have used the same column. Next, please. So here is the proposed elevation and the site plan and the planting. We have turned the steps to the porch of the porches to face the sidewalk so that the spaces in between can be planting beds. And then the trees have been located to be in the hyphens so as not to block the view of the porches. Next, please. So before and after, the left is the before perspective, and on the right is the proposed. Next, please. And then here you can see it enlarged with the gable removed and the changes just described to the porches. Next, please. Moving around to the Line Street side. Next, please. We looked carefully at the houses on the same side of the street and across the street. There were board and staff and community comments about the widths of the previous design, the 2 pavilions. Next, please. So on the bottom is what the earlier design is, and on the top is the proposed design. So what we have done is we've removed the slope roofs, and we've bumped out 2 pavilions, which are vertical and similar to the height of the existing houses. Next, please. And here you can see the before and the after. We've also simplified the window type to be more repetitive. You can see the entry in the middle, and then the simple clean building eave that wraps around. The shutters are on all 3 floors. The color is a placeholder. We imagine that the building will have nice colors, but we would probably study that and propose that in the next presentation. Next, please. And here you can see the plan that goes with it, with the entry in the middle and then the 2 bumped out pavilions to the right and to the left. Next, please. Moving around to the south elevation, you can see it faces an adjacent house with a motor court. Next, please. And the before on the bottom and the proposed on the top. Next, please. And the top shows that we've taken the idea of the 2 pavilions list that we just described on Line Street, and we've carried it to the south. The outline in the foreground shows the house that's blocking most of it, but the pavilion on the southwest, it will be visible from that house's motor court. Double hung windows and shutters on every opening. Next, please. And there is the plan that goes with it. Next, please. Finally, moving around to the east elevation that faces the motor court, we've made significant changes here. Next, please. Before on the bottom and the proposed on the right, the same general comments about simplifying the window types, looking at parapets, looking at gables. Next, please. And then the before and after. So we tinkered with the plan so that the main entry, which in the earlier scheme was on the bottom left on the southern side, we've relocated it to the center of the building, which seems to be a logical idea. The hyphens in between the 3 pavilions have been pushed back farther, and then we've simplified the eave line and are using mostly double hung windows with shutters on this facade. Next, please. So here you can see in the plan, the entry in the middle, the 2 hyphens where the 2 stairs and the means of egress, they've been pushed back so we get lots of shadow and relief on this facade. Next, please. And then finally, going to the perspective on St. Philip. Next, please. Here you can see the existing. Next, please. And then this is the proposed. Next, please. And then an enlarged elevation with the narrower porches, the changes with moving the south porch 1 window bay to the north, and then the simplification of the eave and the simplification of the windows and the addition of shutters. So we look forward to everyone's comments and what people have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer.
We will now proceed to
Any public comment from anyone in the audience this evening?
Preservation Society of Charleston. We first want to thank the applicant for reaching out to us on this proposal. This building has struggled through earlier deliberation and it's come a long way. We appreciate the project team responding to our comments and the direction of board and staff. And we wanted to acknowledge this as a good example of a project that has improved and responded positively to the design review process. So at this point, we are comfortable with the application receiving conceptual approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minigan. Further public comment on this agenda item? Hearing none, we'll move to city staff comments. Recommendation.
Proposal to appropriately respond to previously incorporated staff and board comments. This includes revisions to simplify the roof massing, which was a sticking point. The overall composition has been simplified and unified. We're recommending conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. The applicant, any member of the applicant's team can respond or rebut if they care to clarify.
May I just say, Justin Schwebler from HCF could not be here tonight, but he provided a written comment of his support.
Yep, and Mr. Lee, since you last appeared, or you may have heard this week, rather than belaboring the public with reading all the comments into the record, with the board integrates those into our deliberations.
Just tell me to shut up. It's fine.
You're good. Thank you very much. I know he appreciates that. His employer appreciates that. We will now move to board discussions and a potential vote on this agenda item.
I will. Effort and the team. It's great. So thank you very much.
Further comments?
Yeah, the simplicity and rationality of the current proposal is very much appreciated.
I think moving to a central entryway, having uniformity of shutters and porches, narrowing those porches, it presents very nicely and is, I think, much more complementary to the existing structures, even though we're talking about necessarily about a little bit different scale with this particular project. I still think it's complementary to the neighborhood.
I have a little question. Double window above, what kind of?
There's a demising wall, and so we're using the double window with a wider mullion to accept it. And those units have the two windows. So that's the one location, but we had heard comments before about using the Palladian style window and went to the hang window with two windows. So there's a plan behind the elevation.
I just personally feel like if you separate them more.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion. Conceptual approval.
Mr. Metters has made a motion for conceptual approval of board and staff comments. Is there a second to his motion? Second from Mr. White. Motion's in order, so I'll go down the roll. Ms. Sobchak, how do you vote on this motion?
Yeah.
Mr. Metters. Mr. Favor. Mr. White.
Yay in favor.
And myself, yea in favor. Thank you very much. Thank you to the applicant. Moving apace, agenda item number 7.
145 Calhoun Street is requesting conceptual. And he's also requesting preliminary approval for minor addition to existing steel trellis. The building was constructed in 1905. It is not rated. It is in the Oldham Historic District. And we've got Kevin Hortfield to present. And before that, sorry, some context. Aerial right here, this is across from Marion Square. Building is the one that includes the Walgreens. We have the existing steel trellis, and he'll show you some images that are similar to show you where the new portion is. West. All right, I'm at it.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. My name is Kevin Richter, architect for the owner. This is actually an existing rooftop bar restaurant that's being renovated to a new bar restaurant. You guys have seen this. It's been a while. You can similar photos to what you just saw. If you look really closely, there's a red line that outlines where the proposed new steel trellis is from different viewpoints. Next slide. Here it's from essentially the middle of the street, but it's just over the parapet to the right. Just over the parapet. Well, I do want to point out one thing on these existing photos as well. The channels within the steel I-beams on the trellis are pretty close together. So there's a relationship between the solid trellis and the open space is actually, it's more closed and open, which will come into the conversation when we look at what we're to cover it. So next slide, please. Again, the red outline of the proposed steel over the existing deck. Next. Different angle. And again, the existing deck with the proposed steel. So here's the
existing plan, the green hatched area is the existing trellis that we're proposing. Clear, essentially a translucent corrugated sheet over that'll be drained down to the existing roof deck. The red hatched rectangle is where the proposed structure is. Next slide. And this just shows the furniture layout with the noted. Next slide, please. And then the roof plan, and so this shows obviously the green areas existing, the red dashed lines proposed. They're both going to have similar or the same steel structure with steel channel, and then the corrugated plastic sheeting, rain protection. Next slide, please. Elevations showing facade. Obviously, they're pretty minimal impact to the existing conditions. Enlarged existing proposed on the bottom. Next, please. This is a section through showing the new location of the steel structure. And then from the rear of the building, from essentially the parking lot, if you know the area. Next, please. Section through the structure, the existing steel, and obviously what's hatched in red or shown in red is the new corrugated sheet. Next, please. And then a wall section, the proposed area. So I did have a preliminary conversation with the structural engineer. The spans are longer on the proposed new structural components. We can get either identical or close to the same size structural steel. They're definitely going to be thicker, might be an inch or so taller. In the grand scheme of things, standing 70 feet away from the sidewalk, it's not going to be noticeable. And then that on that drawing, as mentioned earlier, just to scale the gaps between the channels that are turned down and the solid, it's definitely more solid than it is open. And it's a very simple system of just a single pitch to the exterior of the building, and then an interior gutter system behind the steel.
Thank you, Mr. Any public comment on this agenda item?
Not written.
No written comment. Thank you. City staff comments and recommendations.
Through this motion of deferral is to allow for proper documentation and clarity to be incorporated into drawings. Height dimensions have been included on page 8301 of the newest submittal. However, applicant still needs to express the location of all downspouts and to provide information on the durability and aging effects of the proposed polycarbonate material prior to or during preliminary review. Reiterate, I know you've touched on that a little bit tonight, and this comment is intended that we believe that can be addressed in the applicant's response to it. Otherwise, we're recommending conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
Good. Mr. Hartman, for any response?
Yeah, I mean, just that I agree. I think it should be part of the conversation. We, like I said, have talked to a structural engineer, have looked at materials. If this is something staff and board will approve, we would obviously.
Thank you. Very good. Board discussion and a potential vote on this agenda.
I think our previous comments have been satisfied.
I do as well, and I'm also confident that our staff is experts on materials,
Be they novel materials or otherwise in their application here. So I'm confident that board staff, the staff comments being integrated, be they about the downspouts or about this translucent material, will get resolved. Further board comments? Here none. Is there a motion?
Conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
Mr. White, is there a second? Luda beat you to it. Ms. Sobchak got the second. Mr. Metters, how do you vote on this motion? Mr. Favor? Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
Ms. Sobchak? I and myself, yay in favor. So we've given conceptual approval incorporating board staff members. Thank you.
It's the most thoroughly abused structure in Charleston.
Yeah, given its lifespan. Agenda item number 8.
Okay, that one is 151 Main Street, requesting preliminary approval for modifications to the southeast corner of the existing building, including storefront, glazing, raised patio entrance ramp, and metal canopy. The building's not rated. It was constructed in 1981. It's in the old and historic district. And just a refresher, we have conceptually approved this portion of the modifications to the building, as well as the 3rd and 6th floor loggias, which also got preliminary, I believe. But this, we're coming back to the 1st floor. So conceptual's out there, and that's where we're at with this building. Okay. Context if you would like to get refreshed.
Sure, if you could just stay where you are, Mr. Batchel. You can say
Sorry,
it.
I always forget the context sometimes, so we've got context slides. So,
I remark a building from a very unfortunate period that improves with time. It's very strange. Mr. Batchel.
Thank you. My name is Clark Batchelder with Goff D'Antonio Associates. I'll just go through some of the changes from conceptual. So we're requesting preliminary approval with final staff as this project is just with some modifications to the southeast corner of the building. We maintain the raised patio area we've specified. Yeah, you can go through these couple pages here. Yeah, the site plan here shows in blue the raised areas where we will have planter boxes and create a dividing entrance into this new proposed restaurant. We're still working on getting a tenant with the owner, but it's most likely going to be some sort of fine dining. And so, next slide, please. So we took off the furniture layout for now, but we're proposing to have two 21-foot wide sliding glass door systems that will really open up this space onto the patio and invite, the street activity to this new tenant. Main entrance is still going to be on the south of the building. Materials here will be blue stone on the pavers on the patio to match basin entrance, the main entrance to the building. Slide, please. This just shows you, this gives you an idea of the ceiling of canopy, and we're proposing to have a wood ceiling and the expanse of that, mainly just to give you access into the building with rain cover. A few changes that we did make from conceptual to preliminary was to more relate the glazing openings to the building and the 24-foot bay structural spacing. Next slide, please. Yeah, these are just elevations. We've further revised the canopy to have tie rods back to the south facade at every 24 feet, which relate more to the structure, and it having a simple canopy rather than a structure with columns, we feel better integrates into this building. These are details showing the sliding glass wall, and if you go to the next slide, the proposed canopy. One of the comments was that it looked prefab, so we've definitely integrated this
canopy into the building with tie rods back to the structure. Provide that cover for the new entrance at the corner. Next slide. These are materials, we're looking to match the existing materials as best we can and use black as an accent color. That's the color of the storefront now. Next slide, please. These are perspectives showing the new canopy and the new sliding glass walls open. The proposed raised planter patio area and the new restaurant entrance. Next slide. And really the proposed is not a whole lot different, except for we're using the existing openings more so and relating that back to that 24-foot bay. Next slide. I believe this is the overall. This kind of gives you an idea of, we did get preliminary on the loges, so it shows you the loges, having those overhead doors, and then also the canopy at the south corner. One thing I did not mention was the louver. There was a board comment about how to address the kitchen exhaust, and we're working with an internal system to exhaust out without having any mushroom or anything on the building. And so we proposed a louver that will be able to handle that capacity. We still have yet to design what's inside because we need to work with that kitchen consultant at that time. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Batchel. Public comments written? Any public comment from the gallery tonight? None? City staff comments and recommendations?
Newest proposal is a change to a sliding glass wall system from the previously approved fixed storefront system and the expanded ground floor openings. The application does not depict the storefront system's appearance when closed, but in general, staff is not opposed to a fold-away system. Unless required, the sliding glass system should fold away to the interior. FDC signage should be closely coordinated in color to work with the building's exterior while adhering to fire marshal requirements. Applicant to determine if the existing FDC signage can simply be relocated or replaced with similar in kind. 3, tenant signage to be reviewed separately. 4, the very visible and new exhaust louvers at the south elevation shall be painted to match the adjacent wall material. And 5, bluestone currently exists for the primary entry to the building, and staff is neutral to the proposed change at the restaurant entry. While the slide may say conceptual, it's supposed to be, we are recommending preliminary approval with board and staff comments. That was my mistake.
That is okay with all the material we have to cover. Very good. Any response from Mr. Batchel?
No, I generally agree with staff comments.
Thank you, sir. We'll proceed to board discussion and a vote on this item.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to expand just a little bit on very visible and new exhaust louvers that you've talked about.
That system is designed.
No, it's not. How could we put something in place that affected by the amount of noise coming out of that?
I don't know that we can. I think that touches on what's germane into our purview. I think it's a very legitimate concern. I think it's a design consideration for Mr. Batchelder. I don't know, other than what it looks like, I don't know how much
consideration we can give that.
Looks like is one of the issues, right? That maybe the I don't know that this is really true. Literally, you and Jay or Eddie may have more knowledge about this. I've sat right beside those at Mills before.
Sure.
And that's even when you've got a fan that's pushing air, which is what we're talking about here.
That's the only comment I got. The rest of it, I think, great.
And I think it's a very practical consideration. Maybe a gray area on what we can do about it, but other than that aesthetic, it's hard on that.
Further board comments?
I agree with staff comments and recommendations.
Anything further, or is there a motion?
Motion for preliminary approval with staff comments.
There is a motion for preliminary approval incorporating staff comments. Is there a second?
Second for Mr. Favor, we'll go down the roll. Ms. Subject, how do you vote? Mr. Meadows? Mr. Favor? Mr. White?
Yay.
And myself.
All that approval, and we'll see you at the next phase.
And 18 Iron Forge Alley, formerly Boundary Alley lots 10 and 11. Requesting final approval for revision of previously approved foundation from CMU to framing and the application of fiber cement siding instead of stucco. This one's on the east side in the Height District, 2.5 to 3 Old City District. And Mr. Luke Derrick's presenting.
He's aged somewhat.
Are you with this project? So it's a really simple application. It's only 3 pages. If you want to review it or not, I've never, this is not, I don't know.
We were just talking about that before the meeting.
We
like,
were.
It's
We
only
talked
like
about
been
this very
2 or 3 occasions
That's
when we've
hypothetical.
not had the applicant present.
I'm not sure, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I'm not sure that we sent notices to the applicants this past week with the million things that we were doing. We haven't been doing that consistently in the last 2 years, so.
I know we've talked about what we did in the past. I will tell you, this is the lawyer jumping out.
Yeah.
The person who tries to keep us out of court.
Yeah.
If there's any question about the proper person having gotten the proper notice, I think the thing to do. That's no criticism because you have 15 things to do. I think just the procedurally clean thing to do is not to potentially discuss or vote on an agenda item where there's any question of whether the applicant had to do that.
Yeah, there must be some good cause. Why
There's,
not?
I mean, that's why what we normally have done is just, if they're not here, we pull it because the process is so dependent upon the applicant presentation.
That's right.
Like with BZA, if no one objects, there's no presentation, but there's always a presentation.
Right, and the staff's inclined, and we know what the comments are. I think we're all sympathetic and it's probably passed, but if we get into a discussion and it doesn't, then we've created a problem for ourselves. So but we should.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to acknowledge that every other applicant was.
I know, so, I know, and for consistency's sake, it's not like we've been,
No.
these have always happened and suddenly.
Well,
But
there's,
I will say that applicant probably has incognito presented it. Maybe he's presented at fairs long, maybe they've done them consistently.
We'll be glad to rectify that in the future, but out of abundance of caution, let's withdraw.
Sounds good.
Thank you. If that's okay.
It is fine with me.
I figured it was good. Agenda item number 10 is a little different tonight. It is a policy statement regarding signage. Since we've moved through other things with pace, give this some due consideration.
it's only 7 o'clock.
The Courier Square phase was amazed me, but that's stranger things. Mr. Court.
Thank you all for your patience and being here. For the record, my name is Courtney. I am staff architect for the city of Charleston. I am here before you this evening to request that we discuss and hopefully arrive at the solution of some issues that staff is facing concerning signage. And as the city continues to boom and to grow, especially in certain areas, the signage is becoming a real issue. I think not only the quantity of signage, but the quantity of signage coupled with the new LED signage, which includes some faux neon signage, is really becoming somewhat problematic for us in terms of reviewing, using the language which currently exists in the signage policies. All the signage policy statement that we are currently using to address specifically the historic corridor district is the general portion and which indicates, which actually discourages the use of any illuminated signage. Additionally, it spells out things should be appropriately tailored to the building design and focuses a little bit more on historic structures than new structure being built in areas such as the Upper Peninsula, above Romney especially, and along I think that what we are looking for is some direction from this board and hopefully the allowance to amend policy statement to extend the language, the amended language into the historic corridor district. That's it. Basically, in a nutshell, we have recommendations. I don't know if you've had a chance to the amended sign policies statement of that pertains to generally, but we have if you've not images of that as well. And with that, I'll let Ms. Parrish run through some images and recommendations, and then I'm happy to entertain any questions.
So, this is, we're running through some example. This is 850 Morrison Drive. This is the building under construction that you're aware of, and the signage request shows a lit sign at the top of the building facing the harbor instead of town. It's somewhat oriented to the raised roadway instead of how we would normally. Most of our signage is oriented towards entry locations or pedestrian. And we also have very limited areas where we have been looking at lit signs. So that's something we'd like to talk about. This Charleston Tech Center. I'm not as familiar with this application, Lawrence, but it does include lit signage here. So these two are within our inbox right now, waiting for a decision in some direction, and that's the two that have sort of instigated this conversation And this is a policy statement, some suggested amended changes. This would also need to be approved by BARS, obviously, but
Did you say you have a copy of that?
I have a copy of it with these edits. You know, right now it does not include, it includes the old and historic district and old city. Thanks, Lawrence. We look at the historic corridor district as a very diverse district. Morrison, Marion, King, all the way down to Park. It's hard to apply a consistent sign policy for the whole district, but we do think that there are evolving areas such as Morrison Drive where some flexibility on our standard sign policy would be pertinent and appropriate, but on a case-by-case basis where we're not applying it to the whole thing, and that's not, we're not wanting to do anything that would apply to the entire district. We have sign policy statements for certain corridors and certain streets, King, like certain sections of Spring, certain blocks of Meaning. This is our sign policy statement that everything else. It's loose enough to be, it's loose enough to have the flexibility to review things on a case-by-case basis, but it doesn't include that district, and we're seeking direction on. I feel like this section is an evolving area where we can have some more flexibilities.
Really funny that we have so many policy statements about signage, and they're so specific and so like laser focused on little parts of town. And I think the reason that we have a BAR policy on signage at all is because we're trying to protect the integrity of the historic fabric of Charleston. That's not really the thing, you know, on Upper Morrison, Upper Meeting, Upper King. I went back and I read the signage section. The zoning ordinance itself has an entire section devoted to nothing but signage, and it already has a lot of constraints on the size, type, number of signs, the manner in which they're illuminated, and all that stuff. And then you go just a little bit north of the area we're talking about, you get into DRB territory again. Now you're talking about like another set of policies, and the DRB signage policy is a mess. And I actually got to wondering this morning, looking at all this, like, do we just need to say that the BAR does not have a signage policy at all north of Line Street? Just rely on the base zoning ordinance, which is extensive and thorough. And it won't preclude illuminated signage, for example, or things like that, but I don't think that's a real big deal. You know, like the signage that's proposed for Pinnacle, I mean, it's a little unusual to have lit signage on the top of a building in Charleston, but that's a brand new building, and it's going to look unusual no matter what. So signage or not,
I normally roll right along with what you're saying.
Yeah.
When I think about that Pinnacle sign, that level on the skyline, I think about what differentiates Charleston from other places. And by and large, with the exception of the old Coke plant sign when you're coming in, there are not many examples of that until you get North Charleston that are viewed from far away.
Right.
Totally different when you're talking about the streetscape, and whether it be the neon sign at Jim and Nick's before your time. But there's a ton of talk about that. Ultimately, the BAR allowed it to kind of open the door to some more creative signage, which I think in the whole has been tasteful and nice. And as I was discussing with Lawrence before the meeting, Charleston actually has a history, as y'all well know. Anyone who's seen the history, looked at any pictures of our streetscape, sees we've had this tremendous varied vocabulary of signage in the past based on the era, and that's been fine. When I look at this policy statement and whatever is derived from the current one, all I can think about is buildings that were built between 1880 and 1920, which had a curtain facade put on them sometime after World War II. And then someone did what they did at the Morris Sokol building. Now, the Morris Sokol building stands out obviously because it's the only one of its kind, but we dodged a bullet in that not every building on King Street or Meeting Street had one of those curtain facades. A lot of them did, now they're back off. But that's certainly not the model we want to go to. In the same vein, for the same reason we originally adopted this policy, I'm inclined to say that I don't want to see that on the skyline.
The reservation that I have in adopting something tonight is the constitutional issues related to commercial speech. We don't need to get anyone from legal staff on the phone. What I would like from them is an all clear on that issue, because when we're talking about a major national corporation and whether some people would get that signage and whether some people don't, that has broader implications that have nothing to do with the aesthetic of what it looks like. Speaking from what concerns me about the skyline, I think of what I'm speaking frankly, we have lost as a result of all of this, the large buildings that now to some extent block the views of the Charleston historic skyline. I think blocking that skyline and then having illuminated national corporate signs that don't differentiate us from Nashville or Atlanta or Charlotte or Tyson Corner or Santa Fe or Houston is exactly what we want to avoid. As we sit here right now, I don't know how to do that. I want to say this in support of the staff because I hear what you're saying. I don't want you, I want to find a policy, or perhaps even taking it to a different level, BAR, an ordinance that works and passes constitutional muster and does not add work to you and does not bring these to us on an individual basis. And I lean towards a bright line rule, despite the fact that this is a deliberative body and not one that makes policy. I lean towards a bright line rule that would not allow that.
I'm in complete agreement with you, and that's nothing but advertising.
If you get off of the interstate, you're not gonna know how to get to that building because you're still gonna have to Google it, you're gonna have to put an address.
Navigate your way around and you're gonna find it. That's nothing but, that's advertising. That's all it is. What we need to be advertising is the beauty of our community with nothing, just shouldn't use the term advertising. We need to just make sure that everybody views our community.
There's a certain, this is a certain commercial homogeneity that if we could avoid, I believe would be very nice.
So I remember it was 20 years ago, maybe it was 30 years ago, but when I would drive into and I'd be on the outskirts, and I can remember them enforcing this tough sign ordinance. And it was like,
Back then, there wasn't a phone that you.
looking to dress up on. I'm saying,
but the flip side of it was, I remember loving the fact that I had
Yeah.
remember those signs.
Yeah.
They were really, really awesome. And here, the thought.
that looming sign. About a week ago, for the first time, I was coming home from exercising. It was dark. It was the first time I actually looked up and saw the public sign on the outside of the West Edge building. I not seen that. I can't imagine that I hadn't, but I hadn't. I just remember thinking, damn, I wish I wasn't there.
Well, no, it's over and done with now, so that's okay. But maybe in point of your context, but it's inherently different when you're in a commercial district and you're at the vehicular level or you're at the human streetscape level and what you see, your ability to your point, to identify where you're going. It's very different when you're talking about your signage illuminating a skyline that is visible for half a mile. And depending on how it's oriented, is viewable from 270 degrees of the peninsula. I think that's a real challenge. And until we sat here looking at this, which I don't, maybe this was before my time. Yeah.
I may, when it has handled actually, I spoke with the architect and the owner, and they were very receptive, and they said that they would be happy to sign around on the side and not have it illuminated. So I think this all boils down to an observation of Ms. Meadows that really signage in our minds should be signage and lighting both should be wayfinding devices, not advertising.
Certainly.
That's really the crux here. I think if you could pull forward a slide or two, signage have been remiss in delaying the applicant because we really have not been able to parse out a good solution which abides by the ordinance. This would preferably be a lit sign, externally illuminated. There's one down in Morrison Yard that has been proposed to, and they would like to have it internally illuminated. They also have said they're fine with not eliminating that sign. Now, this applicant on this building has been patient with us, but I think that it's fair to say that patience is waning. And we need to, if we're not going to come to a big picture resolution on this, I would ask this board to at least address the signage on this particular building.
Okay, so to be comprehensive and in the manner that you want, which I think everyone agrees we want, and we want a good policy. I think the better example of rather than adopt something in haste is to work with whomever we need to do to get that shopped up to us approved next time. And to your point, to be neighborly and to accommodate these long suffering applicants. If we have to hear 1 or 3 or 5, a few of these while we get a policy in place, I think that's fine. Personally, in terms of my time, et cetera, I think that's better if we get a policy statement or ordinance that we feel confident is not going to be challenged a bunch and end up in front of us anyway.
With this particular item, is the hang up that it's internally illuminated or externally illuminated?
Applicants here, we can ask him.
I don't think that's what's on the agenda.
Right. But do you know, Lawrence?
I think there is a blade sign that was intended to be.
Yes. Okay. What I would say is for this applicant.
Yeah,
This one is just odd.
yeah, we've and we've definitely allowed that. Or I guess y'all sense is that you're stepping outside the policy statement.
Well, no, but there's also going to be a flood in the, I mean, what the thing is that, you know, if we follow our ordinance, we're generally going to turn, at staff level, we're generally going to turn them down. That means they're going to come see you. They have a right to come appeal before the board. Do you want to be doing 20 of these a month? And the answer to that is an absolute no. But I also want a policy that doesn't have the same result that just, you know, bumps it along so that we're still getting 20 because we don't have a comprehensive policy as to both the zone and what it is that we're looking for. I'm also looking at Tori Lawrence, whether in the preservation community, urban design community, there is a standard that we can point to that for, you know, a new district or PUD development that abuts a historic district or historic structures, right? We all agree what we're talking about, whether it's the Morrison Drive corridor, certain places north of Line, UG,
tend to be these larger new construction buildings with some swankier signage. Is there a new model standard out there?
Mr. Chairman, if we get it moved to north of.
So, thank you. That's all right. I hear you. If there is, that would be helpful, right? Because if there's a national or a trade group or architectural or historic preservation standard.
I mean, maybe our Spring Street, our Spring Street policy statement, which I don't have with me, is the western end of Spring, which is Cannon and Spring, where the new hotel is, the loft, and
It's a good example of, well, it's right here, actually. It's the western end of Spring Street and Cannon Street corridor policy statement. And this, and if you're looking for the closest example to a potential it would be this.
Well, then I think that's what we do. We get some working language. We make sure that it incorporates all, besides the procedural stuff about this cropping up in this board in terms of what the aesthetic is and what the standard is or not, flexibility in staff. We get some working language and we get that done for you, support you in that fairly quickly. But if we've got applicants who have been unduly delayed because we need to make this policy update, then let's get them in. But let's not adopt something tonight. Let's talk about coming back in a couple of weeks with something that we feel has some substance to it and do it.
What's the name of that corridor? Western.
It's Cannon and Spring.
Right? Yeah. So Lawrence, do you want us to take some kind of vote? Or do you think you have a sense of the room?
Could you show the recommendation?
Yes, I love that all. I'm not used to driving it here. Okay, so. Certain parts of the historic corridor district are experiencing significant new growth as we discussed. First, the growth is creating a rapid influx of proposed signage, which is not directly addressed in the sign policy statements. Most are asking for signage types, which we would normally have to deny based on the existing language of the general sign policy statement. Denial of these submittals may result in appeals, possibly resulting in a number of these signage submittals coming before the board on a regular basis. The advent of new lighting technologies coupled with an evolving architectural language of, and some of these areas can be compatible and appropriate, but must be reviewed carefully on a case-by-case basis. Overly bright, jarring, or garish colors or designs are to be strongly avoided. The only signage which complements the building in its context being allowed. And then this is a fail-safe. As an internal check, any illuminated signage should be reviewed and approved by the city architect prior to an approval being entered into the city's data management system.
That is a good fence.
That's Lawrence's idea. Okay, so the recommendation was to approve amended language to the general sign policy statement to include the historic corridor district and the allowance for additional types of signage and the illumination thereof on a case-by-case basis. We would like to start a template that is the spring corridor, that's fine. Alternatively, if the board defers the decision on this as presented to you, if the board defers, denies, or fails to act on this agenda item, the signage submittal for 997 Morrison Drive at the Charleston Tech Center should be heard, as they have been waiting a long time for a decision on their signage request, which would be denied by staff under the current general sign policy statement.
So adding that little bit of flexibility, I think it's fine. I'm like I said earlier, I actually would advocate for even more latitude for applicants. I've grown increasingly concerned about the case by case stuff, leaving just too much on your shoulders as staff. But I understand what y'all are trying to do, and these edits are simple, clean, and unobtrusive from my point of view.
By case, nobody will be satisfied.
That's my concern. The lawyer kicking in here says that case by case has a limitation, which is it arbitrary. It's the ultimate cutoff for any government ordinance, regulation, or again, I support every element of what you're doing. I want whatever final form that is in, be it regarding a case by case basis, or we can,
have this zone in which we can approve these territories. I want it to be tied down so that it's not subject to
challenge.
Only point out that everything that this board does and its agents do is subjective on a case by case.
That's true, but we can usually point to standard. That's all I'm saying. We've at least that big binder that we got. I can always point back to that.
So 997 is waiting on it. This is someone, they would like lit signage. Y'all don't have the authority to approve it on your own. But that particular address wasn't on the agenda.
Can we hear it? I don't think we can. I don't think that application was before us. If it was the intent for it to be before us, I don't. Is it attached somewhere?
I had, on my document, I have some policy statement reciting for historic corridor district / 997 Morrison signage. But I think you're right. I'm not sure I had the address on the agenda itself. I probably don't have.
I hate being approved as the one who said you can't do this, but
I did not put the address on the agenda.
So I think we put it on the agenda for next time.
We get 997 in because they're due that. We on this case, or if there are others who would do similar considerations, we get them up here and let them do that, review it, and get around this problem we have.
Come back at the next meeting as soon as then and have a comprehensive policy that all of us have had time to review the language of. For my benefit has been under the nose of Corporation Counsel, and I feel confident we will get you exactly what you want. I just don't want to do it tonight and then have to redo it.
And tomorrow night, BAR Small's doing it also.
And BAR Small has the old Tattoo Moose sign on it tomorrow.
Yes.
We were kind of, to see what feedback we got tonight in order to draft that comment for tomorrow night. It is channel lit sign is the proposal.
So
They're coming.
What's interesting about this whole conversation is I wouldn't change Berlin sign for the world.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just-
Yes.
You have more Sokol, Berlin's, the Coburg cow for that matter.
Coburg Cow is not in the historic district.
No, it's although
It is on historic district.
it
is on historic.
It's in DRB jurisdiction, and is it not in the landmark overlay district? The cow?
It may have gotten individually actually listed in there.
25 years ago.
I mean, there's a bunch of weird stuff in landmark overlay.
There is, and when people find out what's in there, they get really upset. They get really upset when they find out what's in there. But Mr. Grant, Lawrence, we will get you what you want. To the extent we have an applicant who might have thought they've gotten approval tonight, I apologize for that. I think procedurally we would be, we would have a challenge if questions were raised later, and that's really to the benefit of the applicant and the city. So, thank you for your patience again.
Patience.
Thank you, Ms. Joey.
Any further items?
Thank you to city staff.
Oh, yeah, we adjourned it.
Second.